She had been bullying black males for years, concealing herself behind her insignia, until the individual she brought to court caused her entire world to disintegrate. Heat lingered low in the sky over Macon, Georgia, and the air was arid. Just a few blocks from his mother's residence, Derek Roe was operating his rental vehicle on Pine Street. He was accompanied by a grocery bag that contained her preferred lemon biscuits, a loaf of bread, and milk. His weekend at home was intended to be straightforward. Silent. He had not returned in nearly a year, yet everything appeared to be unchanged. On the outside, at least. He peered in the rearview mirror. The patrol vehicle that was following him had been following him for approximately 5 blocks. He reduced his speed, activated his signal, and altered lanes in anticipation that the cruiser would continue to accelerate. It did not. Flashing lights were observed. A single beep was heard from the siren. Derek let out a groan. "Here we go," he murmured, drawing over in a composed manner. The door of the patrol cruiser was opened. Officer Karen Delacroix emerged, early to mid-30s. Blonde, posture that is rigid, sunglasses with a mirror finish. She moved with the assurance that she would be heeded. As she approached, she placed one hand on her scabbard. "Registration and license," she stated unequivocally. Derek maintained his grip on the steering wheel. "Certainly. I will simply access my glove compartment," she abruptly stated, nice and slow. He deliberated in his movements and transferred the documents. "What is the reason for your visit to this area of the city?" He responded, "My mother resides 2 blocks away." She elevated her eyebrow. "This vehicle is leased." "It is. I arrived from Seattle yesterday by plane." A second was too lengthy for Karen to gaze upon him. "Exit the vehicle." Derek blinks. "I apologize." She reiterated, "Exit the vehicle." Despite his growing perplexity, he obeyed, his hands visible. She initiated a leisurely circular motion around him, as if she were inspecting merchandise. "You resemble the profile of a suspect who was involved in a robbery this morning. Continue to remain in that location." Derek stated, "I have been at my mother's residence for the entirety of the morning. You are welcome to verify." She refrained from responding. Rather, she reported the incident via her radio, something regarding reserve. He shook his head. "Officer, I am aware of my rights. I have not committed any infractions, and I am interested in learning about the—" "Put your hands on the hood," she demanded. He hesitated. "Are you genuinely holding me in custody?" She approached him and pushed him. "Hands." Immediately, Derek's expression underwent a slight alteration. "I am not afraid. I am not angry. I am simply disappointed." He turned and placed his palms on the heated metal of the car. Roughly, her hands examined him. He stated, "I am a consultant," as he looked over his shoulder. "I collaborate with Fortune 500 companies. I am not in possession of any weapons, narcotics, or other items that you believe I may possess." She instructed, "Do not engage in conversation. You are exacerbating your own situation." The second patrol car arrived. Hernandez, an additional officer, emerged. More youthful, a greater degree of caution. Karen provided him with a discreet briefing. Although he did not appear to be persuaded, he maintained his silence. Derek was nonetheless restrained by her handcuffs. He endeavored to maintain his composure, as he inquired, "On what charge?" She stated, "I am resisting arrest." I refrained from resisting.
"You raised your voice."
Proceeded toward me. Derek responded, "No." I inquired, "You simply did not enjoy it." Her mandible was fixed. She propelled him into the rear of her vehicle. Derek maintained his composure as they approached the station. It is probable that his mother was inquiring as to his whereabouts when his phone vibrated within his pocket. He contemplated the foodstuffs dissolving in the sun, the most recent instance in which he observed an individual being handcuffed without justification. It had not concluded favorably. He was not frightened. He was fatigued. "She is a source of frustration for me. I am weary of the need to demonstrate my abilities. I am weary of being still while another individual rewrites the narrative." His identification photo was obtained at the station. Walls that are frigid, odor of sterility. Without explanation, a clipboard was thrust at him. Karen completed the report. The words on the page were reminiscent of a script that she had previously composed. Violent, aggressive stance. Voice raised, non-compliant. However, this one seemed distinct. He maintained his composure. He had not requested anything. He had not become agitated. He had gazed directly at her. She was more disturbed by this than she would have liked to confess. However, this would not unfold as she had anticipated. Not at this time. They confined him for the night. There was no telephone conversation. There is no explanation. A fluorescent light that hummed, a hard bench, and the occasional indistinct voice behind the desk. Derek remained seated. The head was positioned against the wall. The restraints have caused him discomfort in his wrists. He was not in a state of despair. He was contemplating his next course of action, as he would for a client in Seattle. However, this was not a matter of numbers or contracts. This was an intimate matter. The door was opened at 7:13 a.m. A clipboard was held by a different officer, who was elderly, and had grey hair around his temples. He gazed at Derek as if he was uncertain about the nature of the individual who sat before him. "You are being charged with resisting arrest and obstruction of justice," he stated. "This afternoon's bail hearing has been scheduled." Derek fixed his gaze on him. "I did not object. I did not impede any process. For no apparent reason, I was apprehended." The officer appeared to be experiencing discomfort. "The report contains all the necessary information. I would appreciate the opportunity to review the report. Your lawyer will be required for that. Then I will contact one." He received a single telephone call. He contacted Marvin Bexley, a criminal defense attorney, who was once his law school friend, and is now based in Augusta. Marvin responded on the third ring, despite the fact that they had not conversed in years. Marvin was already on his way. 30 minutes later. "Remain seated," he instructed before terminating the conversation. "I will take care of it." Marvin entered the office that afternoon, and Karen Delacroix observed him from her workstation. In a navy suit, he was composed and focused. She recognized the type. A barrister from a large city, who possessed a clipboard, and maintained a subdued demeanor that suggested, "Try me." She was not fond of it. She harbored animosity toward him. She sat across from him and beamed. "Is it possible for me to assist you?" "I am representing Mr. Roe," he stated in a composed manner. "I am present to review the incident report and the arrest footage." The desk was touched by her fingertips. "That is an internal matter. It will be given to the court." Marvin marginally leaned in. "Officer, I would assume that you would not object to me conducting an examination at this time, if you are certain of the veracity of your narrative." She acknowledged his gaze, but declined to respond. Derek was released on bond 2 hours later. Karen observed him exit the station with Marvin by his side, and she experienced a tense sensation in her stomach. He was not incensed. He was not overly vocal. He appeared to be resolute. Karen remained in her apartment that evening, gazing at her report. The language was pristine. Practicing. The suspect neglected to adhere to verbal directives, developed a tendency to be verbally aggressive. An abrupt movement was made toward the officer, nothing that she had not previously composed. She accessed her laptop, selected the dashcam footage, and observed the event unfold. She paused when she observed herself pushing him. She reclined, her gaze fixed on the screen. Subsequently, she discreetly closed the lid and proceeded to depart. Marvin and Derek were perusing documentation in the living room of a short-term rental across town. Marvin stated, "She filed it in a manner that was consistent with her routine. It is a recurring pattern. She has previously executed this action." Answer: "Yes. I have already identified 2 complaints. One was sealed, one individual was terminated. However, they are both from black males. Both within the last 5 years. Derek leaned forward. "I will not relinquish this. Are you certain about that?" "Certainly. Individuals such as her depend on the preservation of silence. I am not naturally inclined to remain silent." Marvin acknowledged. "Okay then, we initiate the process by issuing a subpoena for the dashcam. First thing in the morning, I will submit the document." In the interim, Karen arrived at her duty the following day, with her eyes focused and her jaw raised. However, she experienced it internally, a fragment of an experience that she had not had in years. Uncertainty. It followed her into every call, traffic stop and gaze from another officer. For years, She had convinced herself that her instincts were acute, that she was capable of detecting danger. However, this was not an automatic response. This was a distinct experience, something more repulsive. Nevertheless, she maintained her stance. She convinced herself that she had made the correct decision. Derek's attorney was merely attempting to establish himself as a prominent figure. However, that assurance would not endure, because an individual was on the brink of speaking. An individual who remembered what she believed they would forget. The courthouse in Bibb County was a simple long structure with heavy windows, beige stone, and the weight of years. It did not appear to be much. It had witnessed divorces, land disputes, and custody disputes. Additionally, it had witnessed the apprehension of a man who should never have been in handcuffs. Marvin submitted a formal complaint requesting a comprehensive investigation into Officer Delacroix's actions, in addition to the motion to suppress the dashcam footage. Preliminary hearings were scheduled for 2 weeks in advance. Karen was seated in her cruiser when she received the news. Her gaze remained fixed on the folded court notice as the radio crackled in the background. She perceived a constriction in her larynx. "I am not afraid. Pressure is all. The type that accumulates beneath your eyes as an object that you previously concealed begins to ascend." The paper was folded, and the vehicle was placed in motion. Derek, conversely, was meticulous. Marvin reviewed reports, public complaints, newspaper cuttings, and body camera footage upon his return to his office in Augusta. "Anything associated with Delacroix? Is that her?" Marvin inquired, passing an outdated article from 2019. Derek acknowledged. "Permit me to make an educated guess. A child of African descent. Incorrect location. Conforming to a descriptor. Exactly. 18 years of age. College-bound. After resisting a sidewalk arrest, I sustained a fractured wrist. And yet, nothing transpired. The family refrained from making a demand. Absence of an attorney. He merely desired to be left alone." Derek placed the article on the ground. "That concludes here. What they were unaware of, what they could not have known, was that an individual was carefully monitoring the case. A lady named Raina Blunt, who served as a secretary at the courthouse. She had been raised in the same community in which Karen had initiated her patrols. Raina recalled the manner in which events would unfold, the frequency with which specific individuals were stopped, in exchange for nothing more than having to trek home. She also recalled her own brother, Andre, who was incarcerated at the age of 17 for obstructing a public officer. The same vernacular, the same pattern, the same badge. Therefore, when Raina observed Officer Delacroix's affiliation with Derek, a realization occurred. She refrained from contacting the authorities. She refrained from addressing the media. Marvin was her destination. They convened in the rear of a cafe in the vicinity of downtown after hours. Raina stated, "I am aware of her activities, and I am not the sole individual who experiences this." Marvin leaned in. "Are you amenable to conversing? I will provide testimony. I will recount all that I observed and heard. I retained copies of the materials that were instructed to be filed and forgotten. Names, dates." Derek fixed his gaze on her. "Why now?" Raina's irises did not twitch. "Because I should have communicated my concerns 5 years ago. Additionally, I am weary of the notion that I contributed to its concealment." Her words lingered in the air. Marvin refrained from responding immediately. He merely nodded slowly. "That is satisfactory. We will submit a motion to incorporate your statement." Karen parked in her driveway that evening, and extinguished the engine. A flickering light illuminated her veranda. The neighborhood was noticeably subdued than usual. She removed her uniform and commenced to watch the news. She was on the brink of dropping her remote control when she observed her own name scroll across the bottom of the screen. "Officer under investigation for misconduct following questionable traffic stop." This was local coverage, albeit brief, that had a significant impact. She deactivated the television. She observed the change in the room during roll call the following morning. A small number of colleagues refrained from making eye contact. She was greeted by 1 or 2 individuals who were courteous and tightly wound. Even Hernandez, who had provided her with support during the detention, did not speak much. Following the meeting,
Her supervisor requested a private conversation with her. The door has been secured. In a subdued voice, we are imposing a restriction on your responsibilities until the hearing. Karen's body tensed. I adhered to the established protocol. We will defer to the court's decision. She exited the room with the sensation that the atmosphere had been altered. Her department was no longer the sole focus. It was her name that was on everyone's lips. Her narrative examined under the microscope, and something in her intuition told her that this time she might actually lose. However, she continued to believe that she could manipulate the situation, until the video was eventually shown in the courtroom. The dissemination of information was as rapid as a conflagration. Derek's image was ubiquitous by the conclusion of the week, appearing on local newspapers, radio programs and social media platforms. In certain headlines, he was depicted as a professional with an impeccable record, a son who was visiting his elderly mother who had been wrongfully incarcerated. Others maintained Karen's perspective, characterizing him as agitated and non-compliant. The municipality was divided in half. Like they did every Saturday, elderly males convened at Dee's barbershop on MLK Boulevard. The buzzing of clippers was audible. The debates were heated. Derek is acknowledged by me. He grew up 2 houses down from his mother, one individual stated. He never caused any trouble for anyone. She went too far, if he claims she did. However, there were others who were uncertain. In the corner, a youthful male reclined in his chair. Police officers do not stop you for no reason. An elder voice responded. Son, you are simply too young to recall. Churches began to murmur. In the refreshment rooms, educators exchanged anecdotes. Wallace, a retired mechanic, arrived at Marvin's office and stated, "She did the same to me. In 14, I was departing the warehouse when I was struck by the hood, due to my inability to react promptly. No one was informed. Did not anticipate that it would be significant." Marvin listened attentively before pausing. "Would you be amenable to stating that in writing?" Wallace exhaled. "Are you certain that they will now listen?" Marvin responded, "We only require one truth to penetrate the surface. In this case, it is the crack." In the interim, Karen's universe was contracting. She was unable to visit her preferred coffee establishment without encountering individuals who were inspecting their beverages. Someone literally turned and walked away from her as she entered the grocery store in front of them. A few residents maintained their distance, feigning to be preoccupied with their phones as she passed. Silence greeted her at the station. Conversations with officers with whom she had previously enjoyed a chuckle are now brief. Her receptacle had been relocated to the opposite end of the room. She assured herself that it was only transient. Consequently, it would dissipate. She was aware, however, that something had occurred. She began to refrain from approaching reflections. She observed an individual whom she did not recognize each time she turned her head. Individuals who collapse under pressure. During that weekend, her sibling placed a telephone call from Florida. A year had passed since she last communicated with him. "Are you feeling well?" he inquired. She responded promptly, "I am in good health." "Are you certain? I encountered your name on the internet. It pertains to governance, individuals who intend to generate disturbance." For a brief period, he maintained his silence. "Please ensure that you are being truthful, Karen." "If you are not," she interrupted. "I stated that I am in good health." He refrained from disputing the matter. "I have just bid you farewell," and disconnected. She threw her phone onto the settee, and sat down with great force. The apartment was eerily silent. Her thoughts shifted to Raina Blunt, the secretary at the courthouse. The previous day, she had observed her prolonging her glance. Karen had previously recognized the expression, "Someone is in possession of an object."
It is possible that she was aware. It is possible that she maintained archives, including records and names. And if she did, Karen stood and poured herself a drink. She would not be deterred by a single traffic stop. She had labored for an excessive amount of time. Too much was sacrificed. Raina completed the typing of her signed affidavit at Marvin's office. They included it in a container that was expanding and was titled Roe v. Wade Decision. By this time they had statements from 3 men, Wallace, another warehouse worker, and a retired teacher, all of whom described virtually identical encounters with her over the past decade. Do you still believe that we will be able to access that dashcam in a timely manner? Derek inquired. Marvin stated, "We will acquire it. The order was signed by the judge yesterday. It will be heard in court next week." And with that, the emphasis shifted from words to evidence. The municipality was in a state of anticipation. A few individuals wished to witness the exposure of a police officer. Others hoped that the matter would be overlooked. The night preceding the hearing, Karen sat in her cruiser outside the station, observing the streetlights as they flickered. Her pulse beat rapidly within the courthouse located across the street. She was still capable of lying on the stand. She was capable of manipulating it to a certain extent. It is possible that individuals would accept her. But then the dashcam footage arrived. Silence was no longer an option. The courtroom was not overcrowded. However, it was permeated with a subtle sense of unease. Family, neighbors, reporters and city employees occupied the wooden benches, their gazes fixated on the defense table where Derek sat, his hands folded, his demeanor unwavering. Marvin stood beside him, perusing a substantial stack of documents. Officer Delacroix, who was situated across the aisle, was stiffly seated in her uniform. Lips were firmly closed. Looking forward, Judge Bernice Lockwood entered with a resounding thud of the gavel. "All arise." Everyone rose to their feet. "You may become seated." This was not the complete trial. The purpose of the preliminary hearing was to evaluate the evidence and ascertain whether charges would be pursued. However, all individuals in the room were aware that it was more than that. The subject of this discussion was reputation, confidence. The past. Marvin proceeded to the center by standing and walking. "Your Honor, the defense requests that the dashcam footage from Officer Delacroix's cruiser be the first to be presented. The incident report that was submitted against my client is explicitly contradicted by this footage." The judge acknowledged. "Proceed." The screen's illumination caused a minor dimming of the room. The video commenced. Clear audio. The time indicator is blinking in the corner. Derek's automobile. Flashing lights. The voice of Officer Delacroix, urging him to exit. Her hands were clasped around her scabbard. The sentences she spoke were shortened. The tone is rapidly intensifying. Then the thrust occurred. Karen pressed Derek against the bonnet as the courtroom beheld the scene in silence. Absence of abrupt movement. There is no resistance. A male poses a query in a composed manner. Then the closures were applied. Silence ensued. The adjudicator turned to Karen, after the footage concluded. "Officer Delacroix, is this the interaction that you described in your report?" Karen repositioned herself in her perch. "Not quite, Your Honor. However, in the present moment, did the defendant ever raise his voice or lash out at you? He called into question my authority. Did he resist?" Karen gazed at Derek for the first time. He maintained his composure. "No," she conceded. "Not in a physical sense." Through the throng, a gentle murmur emanated. Marvin arose once more. "Your Honor, we also have 3 attestations from other men in this community, who have had encounters nearly identical to the Officer Delacroix. These isolated incidents are not misunderstandings. They are a component of a pattern, and for years no one had the ability or desire to contest them, until now." Wallace was summoned to the witness stand. Before speaking, the individual adjusted his tie and cleared his voice. "She struck me as I was returning from work, said that I violated a stop sign by driving through it. I refrained from engaging in a debate. Rather, I inquired about my actions. She ordered me to exit the vehicle, summoned assistance and conducted a search of my vehicle. Nothing was discovered. However, I received a citation regardless." Karen did not raise her head. Afterward, the retired educator arrived. Then the final individual. Each narrative is a unique interpretation of the same event. Karen's irises were adrift as she gazed forward. Eventually, it was her turn. She sat down with her hands clasped in her lap, vowed her oath, and slowly took the stand. Marvin approached. "Officer Delacroix, how long have you been employed by the Macon Police Department?" 12 years. "How many formal complaints have been filed against you during that 12-year period?" 4, she whispered. "Do you believe that any of them were valid?" "No, even this one." She hesitated. "I maintained the conviction that I was adhering to the established protocol. Are you now of the opinion that you were mistaken?" She did not respond immediately. She gazed at the judge, and then at Raina Blount, who was sitting quietly near the rear. Lastly, Derek. "Yes," she replied. her voice scarcely audible. Marvin sat with his back against the wall. "Thank you." The magistrate requested a break. Outside, the air appeared to be heavier than the intense heat. The scene was swarming with reporters. Karen and her attorney exited through a side door. Derek was not speaking to the press, nor was he celebrating, as he stood on the steps of the courthouse. The act of inhaling. Judge Lockwood reconvened the court upon his return to the courtroom. "I have examined the documentation, testimonies and footage. Officer Delacroix's malfeasance and falsification of a police report are sufficiently supported by the evidence to proceed with a full trial. The court has been adjourned for the day." The gavel was struck. Karen gradually rose from her seat. The badge affixed to her chest abruptly felt excessively weighty. However, the verdict did not conclude the matter. The subsequent events would determine whether or not any significant changes had occurred. The trial was not prolonged. The footage was never able to be stopped once it was made public. The footage was broadcast on a continuous basis by local television stations. Within days it was acquired by national channels. Karen Delacroix's name became a symbol for all that was amiss in the policing of communities such as Macon. While the internal inquiry was underway, she was placed on unpaid suspension. Misinterpretation, emotional duress and context were frequently discussed by her union attorney. However, there was no longer any interest in listening. The courtroom was once again full 3 weeks following the hearing. This time, the decision is imminent. Karen now sat in casual attire, badge absent. Uniforms are not mandatory. A pallid visage that had not changed in days, a tight ponytail, and a blazer were all that was visible. Derek was also present, maintaining the same composed, focused demeanor that he had maintained since the beginning. Sitting behind him was Raina Wallace, as well. A few others who would come forward with her. Silent, present. Officer Karen Delacroix was guilty of malfeasance in public office and falsifying a police report. The judge read the judgment in less than 5 minutes. She was not sentenced to prison time. However, she was subsequently divested of her badge and prohibited from pursuing any further law enforcement positions. Reporters chanted her name outside the courthouse. However, she did not cease. She walked rapidly toward the parking lot, her eyes fixed on the ground, as if she hoped no one would observe her. However, everyone did. Derek's back was tenderly caressed by Marvin. "You successfully completed the task." Derek did not respond immediately. He gazed outside at the cameras. The multitude, the individuals who had finally begun to pay heed, he stated, "I did not perform any extraordinary actions. I simply refused to yield." A council of legal experts was broadcast by a local news crew that evening. One of them referred to the case as a wake-up call for lesser departments that believe they are immune to accountability. Another cautioned that this single victory does not negate the years of silence. Derek refrained from viewing it. He was once again at his mother's residence, where he was enjoying coffee from a cracked mug while sitting on the veranda. She sat next to him and presented him with a platter of buttered toast. She inquired, "Are you feeling well?" "I believe so," he replied. "However, it is not truly concluded, you know." His mother nodded. "It is never the case. However, this time, they were required to investigate. They were unable to disregard you." He gazed out at the street, laughing with his companion. A young boy rode by on a bicycle. A dog was being walked by an elderly man. Life continued to progress. However, it is now moving in a distinct manner. The city announced a review of all encounters made by Officer Delacroix in the past 10 years. A week later, notices were sent to more than 30 individuals who had previously submitted complaints to Internal Affairs. The mayor issued a statement that pledged transparency. However, Derek was not concerned with the promises. Proof was his objective. Consequently, he initiated a civil lawsuit. For the sake of public record access, rather than for financial gain, he desired complete transparency. Patterns, documents, names. He was determined to ensure that the subsequent individual did not have to demonstrate his legitimacy on the street where he had grown up. A month later, Karen departed the city. There is no official statement. There is no need for an apology. "I have just left." The sale of her residence was conducted in a discreet manner. Her cruiser was auctioned off. Her name gradually dissipated from the news cycle, but not from the town's memory. Rayner addressed the audience for 3 minutes at a town hall 6 weeks later. There is no reason for anyone to be afraid to inquire as to why they are being stopped. No individual should be required to demonstrate that they are deserving of respect. We are unable to reverse the past. However, we can prevent it from being repeated. Applause ensued. It was not exceedingly boisterous, but it was substantial, genuine. Derek eventually accessed his inbox later that evening. Hundreds of communications from strangers thanking him, sharing experiences, and requesting assistance. A few individuals hail from Georgia, a few from afar. All of them were examined by him. He did not seek attention because he desired it. Rather, each narrative served as a reminder of why remaining silent had never been an option. For the first time, the individuals who were consistently disregarded were given a voice. Months have transpired. Time passed, and the headlines shifted. What cities do, they did. Persisted. Continued to operate. Continued to maintain the illusion that everything was in order. However, something had changed. In a low voice, in the areas where individuals previously conversed in a whisper, Derek's case was incorporated into the curriculum of a government instructor at Eastside High. The younger audience at the barbershop began to pay closer attention when the elder individuals discussed history. In the church bulletin, an individual penned the following: "Your voice possesses power, regardless of whether you experience tremors when employing it." Derek refrained from returning to Seattle immediately. He remained. He began attending city council meetings. At first, it is best to refrain from speaking, and instead observe. However, ultimately, individuals began approaching him with inquiries. Is it possible for him to review a complaint? Is it possible for him to assist them in the composition of a letter? Is it possible for him to impart his knowledge to them? Therefore he executed the action. He conducted a workshop entitled Know Your Rights at the community center every Tuesday evening. Information disseminated. Attendance increased. Teenagers, seniors, mothers who are single, even a single off-duty officer, who was seated in the rear, was present and silent. One evening, a 17-year-old named Keon inquired, "Did you not want to give up at some point?" Derek halted. Then he stated, "Yes. Numerous topics. However, even if I did, she would retain her insignia, and I would still be contemplating the potential consequences of my silence." Keon acknowledged. "I suppose we can no longer afford to overlook certain matters, right?" "No," Derek replied. "Not anymore." Every few weeks Marvin traveled from Augusta to the area. They continued to pursue the civil case. However, their primary topic of discussion was transformation. What it signified. The actual amount of effort required. Derek stated one evening, "It is not about punishing individuals. The objective is to ensure that the truth is taken seriously." Marvin raised his eyebrow. "That is intended to be featured on your campaign posters." Derek chuckled. "Do not even begin." However, the truth is that individuals had begun to inquire, regarding the regional office, regarding leadership, regarding the subsequent events. He had not yet provided a response. However, he was aware that this was not the conclusion. Karen Delacroix maintained her privacy in a modest rented residence, located 2 cities away. Unemployment. Uniforms are not mandatory. There is no spotlight. She submitted an application for employment in the private security sector. However, she was identified. Her name was now a cause for concern. Her insignia, which she had previously worn with pride, was now the object that barred all entrances. She viewed one of Derek's seminars on YouTube. Without identifying oneself, one time only, she refrained from responding. She did not like or share the content. Nevertheless, she maintained her attentiveness. And when he stated, "Your silence is someone else's permission," she remained seated for an extended period of time after turning off the video. Not all individuals are granted redemption. It is not requested by all individuals. However, the lesson was no longer hers. It belonged to the municipality, to the children who are currently residing in that area, to those who previously believed they were alone. Truth is not dependent on permission to be significant. It is simply necessary to communicate it. And when it is spoken aloud, when it is believed, heard and supported, it has the power to transform everything. If you are currently viewing this,
and have ever been instructed to remain silent, to relinquish control, or to maintain a low profile, please refrain from doing so. Your narrative is significant. Pronounce it, distribute it, strive for it, regardless of whether your voice is trembling. And if you believe that stories like this should be told, shared and remembered, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. This is not fair for the views. This is to provide a platform for individuals who have been silenced for an extended period of time.